Good evening, everyone. I hope this video finds you well. This is Marna with the Eden Foundation. I am a registered nurse in the United States of America. So I have my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing as well as my Bachelor's of Science in Biology. Today I'm coming to you guys in lieu of World Menstrual Hygiene Day, which is actually May 28th. And we thought that was especially an important day for us to highlight because it kind of coincides with the trip that we took to East Africa in late November to early December of 2019, where we visited a few locations, and our goal was to distribute menstrual hygiene kits. We had about 250 menstrual hygiene kits, which consisted of liners and inserts that could be attached to underwear, completely bio-friendly, environmentally friendly. They were made of cloth, so they could be easily washed and dried in the sun, and if taken care of properly, they could be used for up to a year. We thought that was especially important for girls like in schools and situations like that where not having sanitation items that are environmentally friendly was going to be an issue. And we also gave them to them in these nice little bags that were very discreet, and you wouldn't know that there were menstrual hygiene supplies in there. One of the major issues for that was going into the trip, we did a little background research and we found that there was a stigma associated with girls and their menstrual cycles and other people knowing about it. Basically, they were supposed to be silent about their cycle and things like that. So we didn't want to cause any extra shame or anything like that, but we also wanted them to know that hey, this is a real issue and this is how you can take care of it. I think going into the trip, I didn't realize how impactful it was going to be. I knew it was somewhat of an issue to get menstrual kit supplies and stuff like that. But as an American growing up in the US, I never really knew that it was that hard for other people to find menstrual hygiene supplies, because we can just go to CVS, we can go to Walmart, we have all these resources that are available to us, but it's not that easy in third world countries, especially what we saw in Ethiopia. Girls basically had little to no supplies at all. So some of them were improvising, finding kind of old clothes, anything that they could use, which was in the long run not very sanitary either. So that was a little bit of an eye opener. So I'm going to start with some of the sites that we actually visited. We were able to go to Jewy refugee camp in Gambella, or a little outside of Gambella. We also went to an all-girls boarding school right on the outskirts of Gambella. And we also were able to go to a co-ed prison and visit the women's side and give them some of the supplies and kits and stuff. As you can imagine, prisoners are on the lower end of the totem pole for a lot of situations that they're in, specifically in third world countries. The women in the prisons, if they weren't getting menstrual hygiene supplies from family members, they just had nothing at all. And their conditions would be a whole bunch of them. Like, I think there was 14 of them in one small room. Everyone had their own little cot. And when somebody was on their cycle, it was evident to everybody else because they didn't have the proper supplies. They were also improvising. You can only improvise for so long. So we found it necessary to give them supplies as part of the trip, just because they're humans too. Prisoners are people. And a lot of them were also for crimes that were petty crimes. So we wanted to make sure they were taken care of. I think there was about 14 women in the prisons that we were able to give menstrual hygiene kits to in the prison that we went to, but we also gave about 20 to 30 more kits to one of the officers that was going to distribute them to other prisons around the region. We went to Jewy refugee camp and visited. There was girls in school there. I think we visited ninth graders. I think it was a ninth grade class. The youngest was probably like 18 and the oldest was 40. So they had a wide range of students. Actually, I don't think they were all in ninth grade. I think it was high school, but the oldest was a ninth grader. So like the 40-year-old female was a ninth grader. And basically the students expressed to us how they had no access to these supplies whatsoever, disposable or otherwise. So they were extremely happy that we were able to bring those kits to them. And then we kind of did one-on-one interviews to find out what really the impact of the trip was for them, which I'll go into detail about a little later. And then we were also able to go to the all-girls boarding school. I think there was about 150 girls there that we would distribute the kits to as well. And they also shared with us the impact of them. The prisoners did as well, which I'll go into detail about later. It was a very eye-opening trip, and it was very rewarding, and kind of goes to show how important menstrual hygiene and proper care in that department is all around the world. After we distributed the kits, the consensus was pretty much the same amongst the prisoners, the schoolgirls. They all felt that this was really going to help them in the long run. And they kind of shared with us some things about how not having menstrual hygiene supplies can affect them. They were telling us things like if they didn't have supplies, then they wouldn't be able to go to class. So imagine a girl's on her cycle for a week, and during that week she has to stay at home. And then by the time she comes back, she's behind, and she has to make up that whole week's worth of stuff. And sometimes the education is fast-paced, or it's just not organized in a manner that is easy to catch up with. So she would try to catch up, and then the next month, the same thing's happening. The next month, the same thing's happening. So they're getting further and further behind to the point where they just decide to drop out of school. And that was extremely disheartening for us, because us at the Nyayin Foundation kind of pride ourselves on being able to have an education and serve in a broader capacity to people back home. So the fact that something as simple as having your period every month, which we take for granted here because women work while they're on their cycle here, women go to school, and it's not an issue, but for them back there, it really hinders them from being successful if they don't have access to the proper supplies. So they just kind of expressed to us that with their cycles and not having the supplies, their rates of dropping out increased, which then we kind of tied to not finishing an education. We tied it to kind of practices of like child. And for women dropping out of school, then they're not able to get the proper education that they need, and they're not able to get jobs and careers. So that leaves them more susceptible to exploitation practices like child marriage, finding a man that can take care of you because they're unable to take care of themselves because they don't have an education, or abusive situations that they're in just because they have no way of taking care of themselves, or having to stay at home with their parents who then have to take care of them and their children with limited resources. On the other end, there was also issues that we found that in not having menstrual health supplies, they also weren't getting education on menstrual health, which means they weren't also getting education on sexual health and contraception, preventing STDs, preventing pregnancies, any of that rate, which was really alarming because the HIV and AIDS rates in the region of Gambella were the highest in all of Ethiopia, and it had a relatively small population compared to all of Ethiopia. So the population in Gambella, from what I could find online, was about 435,000 people, whereas the population of Ethiopia as a whole was 109.2 million. So in order for that little region to have such high rates of STDs, specifically HIV and AIDS, it was extremely concerning and kind of made us wonder what other kinds of problems might arise from not having access to proper feminine hygiene care for your menstrual cycle. We also, from a health standpoint as well, certain people tend to bleed more during their time of the month, so that can give rise to anemia, having low red blood cells, low hemoglobin, which kind of distributes oxygen throughout your body. So I was also wanting to know kind of like the correlations between not having access to these things, because if they're not having access to the supplies, they're also not having access to the medical attention. So like, let's say someone's anemic, lightheaded that time of the month, they're probably just staying in bed. They're not going to the hospital to figure out what's going on with them. So over time, they become more and more anemic. And then by the time they're of childbearing age, maybe there's health complications and risks that are added to their pregnancies based on their anemia. So that was also another issue that arose during the trip. So there was actually a lot of issues that we found could arise from not having access to proper supplies for your menstrual cycle. A lot of issues that were expressed to us by the girls, even the men too. Believe it or not, the men had some concerns about how the women were able to get access to supplies and how they deemed that it was necessary as well, which was really nice because we had a pretty good team of men and women that collaborated there to kind of help us distribute this. And it was really nice that they recognized that it was an issue and they recognized that we were doing something really important for the people of the region. So we're very grateful for that. So thank you guys. I guess with all the impact that we saw there, there's still much need for more improvement. There's always the need for more. So how can we help? Getting supplies there, getting education out there, giving them access to not just the supplies, access to medical attention that they might need. Here in the US, we get checkups yearly, at the very least, when we're in school, when we're like grade school, at least kindergarten through 12th grade, there's actually a yearly physical that you have to get in order to start school in the fall to make sure everything's okay. So even just getting something started, like helping the clinics with supplies so that they can afford and they can supervise these clinic visits and make them happen. Also getting more menstrual hygiene supplies, preferably biodegradable ones or environmentally friendly ones like the cloths. Those were a big hit just because they're very reusable. We also took to the prison, we took some wound care supplies that we distributed to the prison. But when we went, we also were able to take some over-the-counter medications, which can also be very important, especially, when it's that time of the month, you might have different symptoms. You may have cramping, bloating, headaches, things like that. So even getting those supplies, anything to make that time of the month easier for them would be wonderful. And they also expressed the need for all girls boarding school didn't even have doors on some of the classrooms. So imagine having to go to school and you don't feel safe. A lot of that can go into anything. And I think this first trip that we took with the Nya Foundation was an eye-opener, definitely. And we used it as a need assessment to say, okay, we're going to provide these supplies, but we would also like to know how we can help in the future. So I think helping on the educational aspect, helping in health aspects, just general well-being would help as well. Kind of just don't, and if you don't specifically know how you could help specifically by yourself, you could always donate. We take donations that go straight to the organization that helps us put these programs on. And hopefully when all is well again in the world, we'll be able to make another trip there. We're working on collaborating with kind of the home team there to see what we can do to help them while they're actually on the grounds, while we can't travel there at this time. But thank you for your time. Thank you for participating and helping give awareness to World Menstrual Hygiene Day. Feel free to donate to the Nya Foundation so we can put on more programs like this. Get in contact with us if you want to be involved in any way. The more hands, the more change we can make happen. We really appreciate everything and have a good one.